The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. With the coming of evening, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us cross over to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him just as he was in the boat. And there were other boats with him. Then it began to blow a gale, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that it was almost swamped. But he was in the stern, his head on the cushion, asleep. They woke him and said to him, "Master, do you not care? We are going down." And he woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Quiet now, be calm." And the wind dropped and all was calm again. Then he said to them, "Why are you so frightened? How is it that you have no faith?" They were filled with awe and said to one another, "Who can this be? Even the wind and the sea obey him." The Gospel of the Lord. So greetings to each of you who are viewing this reflection. A long-standing practice in the Christian tradition is what is called either spiritual accompaniment or spiritual direction or spiritual guidance. Of course, it's not peculiar to the Christian faith, it's also present in other faith traditions. It's a long-standing practice whereby a person has the opportunity to meet with a spiritual guide who doesn't tell the person how to think, but rather helps the person themselves sense the presence of God in what is happening in their lives. It'd be wonderful if this opportunity was more readily available, but often it's a question of personnel resources available. But certainly something that's open to all Christians. Those of us who have a specific religious consecration are strongly encouraged to avail of spiritual accompaniment or spiritual direction. And many years ago, one of the directors I used to visit, who helped me, would always have the same two questions. And the questions, I knew they were coming, so they helped me in my preparation. And the two questions was, in the period since we have last met, what has delighted you and what has disturbed you? And I suppose at first glance, the seeming contradiction of those two questions appear both jarring, but both are true. Those questions tap into what are deeply true experiences of our life of faith. What delights and what disturbs. Delight is a graced experience in our lives where a strong sense of the presence of God, a strong sense of peace or of calm. It ebbs and flows over the course of our life. In the readings that we had today, in the second reading from St. Paul and his second letter to the Corinthians, it says, "The love of Christ overwhelms us when we reflect that if one person died for us, then all should be dead. And the reason he died for all of us was so that living people should live no longer for themselves, but for him who died and was raised to life for them. And for anyone who is in Christ, there is a new creation. The old has gone, now the new one is here." That statement, "the love of Christ overwhelms us," is an experience of delight, an experience of the nearness of God in our lives. Delight is both personal and communal. But then there was the other question that the director I used to visit used to ask, "What has disturbed you?" And again, we have that mirrored in the readings that we have today from the book of Job. Job was caught in intense suffering, crying out to God, and God seemed to delay the answer. But eventually it begins with the statement, God speaks from the tempest. And as we know, the tempest is a disturbing phenomenon of the weather, where all is churned up. So Job is in that experience of not being in delight, but being disturbed. Experience being in desolation of emptiness. I said that delight is graced, but disturbance is also graced. What seems to be God's absence, God is very much at the heart of the tempest, at the heart of that experience, even though the experience seems to be to the contrary. And as with delight, the experience of disturbance ebbs and flows over the course of life. It can be personal and can be communal. We perhaps can identify experiences in the life of the church in our own country or elsewhere where we go through times of great optimism. Probably the period immediately following the Vatican II Council would be an example of that. And then times of desolation. Some of the issues which the church has to face today, it very much seems like in the midst of the tempest. The scriptures are able to hold together, not as contradictory, but as together, delight and disturbance. And that is true in our spiritual lives as well. Both are true. But there is one difference. Ultimate delight is the destiny for which we have been created. Disturbance is not an end. It is not the end of the story, but simply part of the journey. I've mentioned the second reading from the second letter of Paul to the Corinthians and the first reading from the book of Job. I'm going to conclude now with reference to the gospel, because that highlights the transition from disturbance to delight. The experience of the disciples being caught in a storm on the sea, and for anyone who may have been through that experience, that can be quite horrific, not knowing what will happen. So they're in that disturbance. But Jesus enters into that heart of that disturbance, even though he appears initially unconcerned, but he brings quietness and calmness and ultimately delight to the experience of the disciples, to the experience of the early Christians enduring persecution at the time this gospel was written, and to each of us. God bless each of you on this Sunday.